Welcome to the Abyssinian Syllabary, where we spell out Ethiopia in 33 characters. I'm Yves-Marie Stranger, your host and the compiler of these Abyssinian lives. Nota bene, while any resemblance to actual countries, past or present, and to historical figures is not purely coincidental, this is a work of fiction. For a primer on these Ethiopian characters, newcomers may start with the prologue by Manuel de Goes. To order the book or a poster of the Abyssinian Syllabary, visit Ethiopia.com. That's UTHIOPIA.com. There is no man, once said Jacob, by which he meant that, as not one man is flawless, one should be willing at times to overlook their weaknesses and, by that measure, to not constantly be fingering our own faults either. The Apocrypha of Jacob. Taitu. Je. Taitu was spiteful in her childhood, which she spent in Wollo. These opulent plateaux contain myriad beasts of horn and hoof and are flanked on the one side by Dankalia and on the other by Gojam, so that many goods flow through these parts. The Wollo are a distillate of the Museum of Peoples of Ethiopia. To apply the essentialist label the Italians were to provide the country a few decades later, as they are not only diverse in mien, but conceal even more contrast behind their languages and tribal guises, and in these stories that they like to tell each other, and like to tell against one another. Taitu first spoke the Amara tongue of her parents, who were the overlords of 100 gasha of plough fields that leaseholders, who spoke Amara too, farmed for them. These hardy peasants turned over large tivis on their cereal besides tilling the fields that lay round Taitu's kinfolk's stockhold, a residence not dissimilar to any in the whereabouts, albeit several times larger and encircled by a barricade of earth clods and wooden stakes. From early on, Taitu knew, with the innate sense possessed by children, that these peasant folk looked down upon her, not only because they were, of course, taller than herself. No, for she was even imbued with this feeling with her coevals, whom she liked to marshal about rather than engage with in play. Yet, however much she tyrannized the urchins with bulrush whips, insisting that they make her ever more beautiful clay dolls, they contrived to display to the damsel lording over them, with signals that were as invisible as they were crystal clear, that it was they that remained above her station. This threw Taitu into fits of fury. She spoke to them in a scornful voice and conceived of belittlements that would diminish them. None to any effect. So that Taitu grew up in Wollo, in this climate, Ethiopian par excellence, in which nothing is said while all is known to all. She understood that her family, together with the others who lorded over Wollo, for all their Amharic mores, were Oromo by blood, pastoralists who had drifted into the region from the southwest of Ethiopia already 2 centuries beforehand. These people had abandoned their cows and their nomadic ways to adopt the plough of the locals, homely people who were given to calling themselves Amara, at first adopting the language, then the tribal affiliation, for they too had once been other of the Ago Kushits. The new feudal masters had not only adopted the plough, they had made the language of their tenant farmers their own, as well as the orthodox religion, so that in Wollo, as is true throughout Ethiopia, nothing was as it seemed. There were Amara of the Mohammedan persuasion in Wollo too, and an Oromo dynasty, formidable Mussulmans, who had been the kingmakers of Imperial Gondar for 200 years. In addition, you had to throw into the Abyssinian cauldron the townsfolk of the old capital of Lalibela, in the mountains of Lasta, where the populations, once Ago speakers to her man, now only speak the Amharic tongue. These Ago descended, if you were to give their stories credence, from this grouping since the immemorial time of the Hebrew Bible. And so it is that Taitu was raised in the fortalice of her parents, where she learned to live in an atmosphere of treachery and make-believe in which nothing was ever quite what it purported to be. When Emperor Menelik set eyes on her, accompanied by her third husband, the Baldarabas Goshu, at the time of a royal pilgrimage to Lasta, Taitu carried herself with the haughtiness that Ethiopians find so becoming in a woman of good birth, and she possessed a towering body of the colour they call red. Menelik had the spouse, first imprisoned, then divorced, so that Taitu could be spirited off to the king's capital, where she became his revered Itege. Taitu was thrilled to discover that the alleyways of power resembled nothing more than the games in which she had so excelled in Wollo. Feared by all, including, in his later years, by her royal spouse, Taitu positioned her countrymen at every tier of government. They were like clay dolls in her hands. The Asmari took to calling her the king's backbone, his sturdy shield, and they were not few, even among her most implacable opponents, in ascribing the Adwa victory to the queen's resolve. Taitu took to bathing in the springs of Finfine, on the southern slopes of Entoto, in the pastures where the cattle earmarked for the imperial kitchens were left to browse. The queen believed that these sulphurous waters soothed the pains given her by an inception of gout in her toes. She at first encamped in a tent of Abugida cotton, before moving into a bathhouse with a timbered veranda in the Gujarati style, where she came to spend most of her days. Her royal consort, as the southern marchers had been pacified by his fiery Salale cavalry, and the restive north being presently in concord with the centre, no longer felt the pressing need to have a cliff at his back. So he consented to come down from Entoto to join his Itege in Finfine, which Taitu called Addis Ababa, the new flower. Menelik's grip began to wane just as Taitu's own strengths waxed. She was said to be the figurehead of the party of tradition and church. She had no affinity with foreigners, nor found any amusement in the innovations they bore as petty gifts for the novelty-loving monarch. The bicycles, the piped water and the telegraph, the moving pictures and the telescopes that so gladdened her husband's heart were anathema to her and to the musty churchmen she surrounded herself with. These priests exuded broadsides on the inventions, calling the bicycles Satan's horse and other such jollities. Taitu continued to receive, sibylline and overweening, the foreigners that thronged to her court to proffer the bromides she disdained. Taitu liked perceiving in their eyes the fear that had been so glaringly absent in the eyes of her childhood playmates.